Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to thank the Mount Olivet Baptist Church in Bethel, Israel, for having the wisdom and the energy to sponsor last year's forum and tonight's. There really are lessons from the Southern Civil Rights Movement 55 or so years ago. Lessons that are applicable to today. And if we don't keep those lessons before us, we'll make mistakes that we don't need to make. In my 15 minutes, and keep me to my time, talk about my 10 weeks in Mississippi, I can only discuss a tiny part of that history. I want to talk briefly about three topics. First, the political purposes of the freedom registering that was spoken of tonight. It was part of the Mississippi Summer Project. It actually began in 1963, and it began because it was so difficult for African Americans to register to vote. In 1964, SNCC unrolled it again. The goal was to freedom register 300,000 African Americans in Mississippi. There were potential 450,000 voters. The goal was to reach 300,000. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 were achieved. There were two reasons for this freedom registration, which was based upon New York State registration form. First was to educate 100,000 people or more in what it means to fill out a voter registration form, a reasonable one. Second was to lay the political and legal basis for a challenge to the Mississippi laws, and not only Mississippi, and others as well. The work of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the work of SNCC, NAACP, CORE, Dr. King's organization, the SCLC, were instrumental in collecting signatures, publicizing the issue, bringing it to the Democratic National Convention in 1964, and then the passage in 1965 of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which made it possible for Black people to register and vote. It's hard to grasp the figures. So I have an old fact sheet which I pulled out tonight. From the Mississippi Summer Project, fact sheet through August 1, 1964. And let me just read you a couple of these statistics to give you an idea of how severe legal apartheid was. In the city of Greenwood, population Negroes, 13, and I'm rounding off, population of Negroes 13,500, registered to vote 268. White population 10,300, 9,500 registered to vote. Holly Springs 7,000, 90 registered to vote. 4,000, 3,000 registered to vote. Throughout the state of Mississippi, 20,000 registered to vote. So I worked in Mississippi for 10 weeks. That's not a long time. I was a kid. I was 19 years old. So actually I was 20. I grew up in a white community like most kids did then who were white. And I went to segregated schools. And then I had the good fortune, I get kind of teary. I had the good fortune of getting a girlfriend who had some foster brothers. And they were being strays. So I used to talk a good game. I was I was for all the good things. And then racism became personal. So you may not know it, but it was illegal in the United States to discriminate in hiring. That was legal throughout the country. And so in 1963, when I was 18 or 19, students at the University of California, where I was a student, said the hell with it, and started picketing the Sheraton Palace Hotel. And so it was a Sunday morning, and I went and joined. And the hotel got an injunction. Well, you can't picket on a Sunday morning outside the Sheraton Palace Hotel. And our demonstration leader, who was a graduate student, said, well, it's up to you. You want to obey this illegal injunction, or do you want to go to jail? So we went to jail. And then when Dick Gregory heard, he came down to the jail and he said, I demanded that I be arrested too. And he joined us in the drunk tank. So I got involved, and I was 18, 19 years old, and some more civil rights activities in the Bay Area, and then I heard about SNCC, and I volunteered. So in June 1964, SNCC, Friends of SNCC in the Bay Area, told me, come with us, we're going up to the Berkeley Hills, and we're going to pick up a nice Willys Jeep, and we're gonna load it with supplies for SNCC, and you're gonna drive it to Mississippi. And I said, wonderful, let's do it. And we went up the hills, and we looked for the car, and we couldn't find the car. And we said, we must have the address wrong. And we looked a couple blocks further, and there was a Willys Jeep. What a wreck it was. Well, the key was on the floorboard, just like it was supposed to be. So we took it and we fixed it up that night, and we loaded it with supplies, and myself and several other volunteers took off across the country. Little did we know that we were driving a stolen car. Anyway, we got there. We got to Oxford, Ohio, where SNCC was finishing its training school. And I got there just as the busloads were loading up. And the head of the seminar project, Bob Moses, was giving a speech to the assorted volunteers. And he was saying, listen, you need to know we're missing 3 people. So anybody who doesn't want to go, stay. So they all went. And I got into my car, because I was late, and I drove to Memphis, Tennessee, where they had a training school for latenicks like me. And I got to Memphis and we had our training school, and I think there were about 15, 20 of us. And then at the end of the training school, they said to us, now, you're gonna take a Greyhound bus down to Jackson. Everybody get in, don't sit together. You don't wanna have a bunch of long-haired white kids going down there and looking obvious. So we all sat away from each other, looking very obvious. We got to Jackson, we were told, call this number, a black cab company will pick you up. And we did. And as the years went by and I saw the amateurishness of our operation, I thought how lucky we were. Well, I was assigned to work in Jackson, Mississippi, and I did for 10 weeks. My job was every day to go out and register people, freedom register people. And I lived in what was called the Freedom House. It was an apartment that was unfurnished, and there were about 10 kids. We were kids, right? 10 kids who slept on the floor in sleeping bags or on the rug or whatever we had. And every morning we would leave and go about whatever assignments we had. And I would leave the house, I would walk out, and I would be met by a group of black teenagers from the neighborhood. They would pick me up. We would, and I can't remember, I wish I did. Somehow we got to the 23rd, 24th, and 25th precincts of Jackson, where I went door to door. They walked with me along the street. We came to a walkway. They stood and chatted. I walked up to the house, gave my pitch, walked back. They picked me up, and we walked further, and again I did my pitch. And what I did with their protection, what I did was I asked people, whoever answered the door, to fill out a voter registration form, a freedom registration form. And if they said yes, they filled it out, or I assisted them to fill it out. Average education of a black person in Mississippi was 6 years. If the person was enthusiastic, I would say, please take a few forms and ask your relatives and neighbors to fill them out. I'll come back next week and pick them up, okay? And if they said yes, that's what happened. And then I would go back the next week, and if we were successful and the person was still enthusiastic, I would then say, would you like to invite some of your friends over to your home to discuss the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party? Because we're trying to form a political party to challenge the racist, segregationist Mississippi Democratic Party. And then, if that happened, a real organizer would come and conduct the meeting. And that's what I did that summer. And I grew tremendously. I don't know how much I helped the freedom movement, but the freedom movement helped me. Mm-hmm. So, a couple of lessons from that. One is, to me, and I've done a lot of organizing since then, that was maybe the finest example of community organizing I've ever seen. It met people where they were, politically, emotionally, physically, and move them forward. That's the purpose of organizing. So at the end of the summer, I went to Atlantic City, where the Democratic Party was being challenged. And of course, we lost, but we won. We won because the issue of racism in Mississippi and other places in the country received national attention and condemnation. We won. So, how much time do I have? I can't see. Am I out?
I'm sorry.
I'm done. Well, I had a lot to say. Thank you very much.